In the Western Balkans today, a single word carries more political weight than almost any other term in the region's contested history: Illyrian. Modern Albanian national identity has, for over a century, rested substantially on the claim of direct descent from the ancient Illyrians, a claim used to argue for deep indigenous roots in the Western Balkans that predate the arrival of Slavic-speaking peoples by well over 1,000 years. This is not a fringe or recent idea. It has been woven into Albanian national education, public monuments, and diplomatic rhetoric since at least the early 20th century, and it carries real consequences, invoked in disputes over territory, historical legitimacy, and national belonging that remain unresolved in the region today. What did the ancient Illyrians actually look like genetically? And does the evidence available today actually support the weight that modern identity has placed on them? The honest answer is more complicated and more scientifically unsettled than either side of any modern political argument tends to admit, and a documentary series committed to following the evidence rather than the politics has to be willing to say so plainly. The Illyrians, as described in Greek and Roman sources, were never a single unified people in the way the label suggests. Ancient writers used the term to describe a loose collection of Indo-European-speaking tribes occupying the Western Balkans, roughly corresponding to modern Albania, Montenegro, Bosnia, Croatia, and parts of Serbia, from at least the Iron Age through the period of Roman conquest. These included groups like the Dalmatai, who gave their name to the Dalmatian coast, the Pannonians, and the Ardeae, among many others, each with distinct territories, material cultures, and, presumably, distinct dialects, though almost none of their actual spoken language survives in any directly recorded form. Illyrian political history reached its most vivid documented moment under Queen Tuda in the 3rd century BCE, who ruled as regent following the death of her husband King Agron, and whose kingdom's piracy in the Adriatic Sea provoked direct Roman military intervention in what became known as the First Illyrian War in 229 BCE, an episode Roman historians later dramatized considerably, portraying Tuda as an arrogant and reckless ruler whose defiance of Roman envoys justified the war that followed, an account modern historians treat with appropriate skepticism given that it survives only through the perspective of the eventual victors. This was followed decades later by a second Illyrian war under King Demetrius of Pharos, and finally a third Illyrian war in 168 BCE that ended Illyrian political independence permanently, absorbing the region into the expanding Roman provincial system. Rome's later province of Illyricum, and the subsequent split into Dalmatia and Pannonia, preserved the name administratively for centuries even after any independent Illyrian political entity had ceased to exist. The material archaeology of the Illyrian world is genuinely rich. Distinctive helmet types such as the so-called Illyrian helmet, which was actually adopted and modified so widely by Greek city-states that its original regional attribution has become something of a historical irony, elaborate bronze jewelry, Hilfert settlements, and burial practices that show both local development and clear influence from neighboring Greek, Italic, and Celtic populations across the Adriatic and Balkan trade networks. What the archaeology has never been able to settle definitively is the linguistic and genetic relationship between these ancient Illyrian-labeled populations and any specific modern population claiming descent from them. The Albanian language sits at the center of this uncertainty, and it is worth being precise about exactly what is and is not established here. Albanian is a genuine language isolate within the Indo-European family. It does not descend from any other currently spoken European language, and its closest relationships to other branches of Indo-European remain a matter of ongoing academic debate rather than settled consensus. Given that ancient Illyrian territory substantially overlaps with the modern Albanian-speaking region, the hypothesis that Albanian represents a direct linguistic descendant of ancient Illyrian is a long-standing and reasonable one within historical linguistics. But it is a hypothesis, not a demonstrated fact, and serious linguists have proposed competing frameworks for just as long. Some argue Albanian descends more directly from a related but distinct ancient Balkan language called Dacian or Thracian, rather than Illyrian specifically, given how sparse the actual surviving evidence for Illyrian vocabulary and grammar really is. Limited to a small number of personal names, place names, and a handful of glossed words preserved in later Greek and Latin sources, nowhere near enough material to reconstruct Illyrian grammar with real confidence, or to test the Albanian connection with the kind of rigor linguists can apply to better documented ancient languages. The honest scholarly position is that the Illyrian-Albanian connection remains a strong working hypothesis rather than a proven genealogical fact, and any documentary or political claim that states it with total certainty is overstating what the linguistic evidence currently supports. The genetic picture is, if anything, even less settled than the linguistic one, and for largely the same underlying reason. The ancient DNA record specifically targeting confirmed Illyrian period burial sites in the Western Balkans remains considerably thinner than the ancient DNA record now available for populations like the Thracians to the east, where dedicated studies analyzing dozens of mitochondrial genomes from confirmed Thracian period necropolises have already been published. No comparably large, systematically sampled ancient genome study focused specifically on confirmed Illyrian sites in Albania, Montenegro, or the Dinaric region currently exists in the published scientific literature at the same scale. What does exist is broader research on Balkan and Southeastern European population history generally, much of it produced as part of large multi-region European ancient DNA surveys, rather than studies designed specifically to answer the Illyrian question. This broader research places the deep ancestry of the Western Balkans within the same general framework that shapes so much of the rest of Iron Age Europe. A foundational layer of early Neolithic farmers who arrived from Anatolia beginning around 7,000 years ago, substantially mixed with a later Bronze Age influx of steppe-related ancestry connected to the broader Yamnaya-descended population. Movements that reshaped the genetic landscape from Ireland to India during the 3rd millennium BCE. This is broadly the same genetic recipe that produced the neighboring Thracian population to the east, and the same recipe that shaped Iron Age populations across most of Indo-European-speaking Europe. What this broader research has not yet been able to do is isolate a genetic signature specific enough to confirm or deny direct, unbroken biological continuity between any particular ancient Illyrian-labeled population and any specific modern national group in the region with the confidence that dedicated, large-scale sampling has achieved for other ancient European populations. Modern genetic studies of Balkan populations do show real patterns of regional continuity, stretching back thousands of years, broadly consistent with populations not being wholesale replaced by later migrations, including the Slavic migrations of the 6th and 7th centuries CE that dramatically reshaped the linguistic map of the region without necessarily producing a comparable degree of underlying genetic replacement. But translating that general pattern of regional continuity into a specific, confirmed genetic link between ancient Illyrians and any single modern ethnic or national group requires a degree of resolution the current published research has not yet achieved. This matters because the Illyrian question sits directly inside one of the most sensitive and unresolved political disputes in modern Europe. Claims of Illyrian descent have been invoked, particularly in the context of the status of Kosovo, as historical justification for competing claims to territorial legitimacy. Albanian nationalist narratives sometimes framing Illyrian ancestry as establishing prior indigenous claim to contested territory, while Serbian historical narratives have generally emphasized different historical continuities and populations in the same region. This is a genuine, ongoing, and unresolved political and historical dispute among historians, nationalists, and governments in the region, and it is not the place of ancient DNA at its current stage of development to resolve it. Nor does the currently available genetic evidence actually support the kind of definitive, exclusive ancestral claims that political rhetoric on various sides sometimes attaches to it. What a responsible documentary account can say, honestly, is this: the Western Balkans show real, deep, and substantial population continuity stretching back through the Bronze and Iron Ages, largely unbroken by any single later replacement event in a pattern broadly similar to what genetics has revealed about many other regions of ancient Europe once population continuity is tested directly rather than assumed. Whether that continuity maps precisely onto the specific tribal groups Greek and Roman writers labeled Illyrian, and whether any single modern nation can claim that lineage more directly or exclusively than its neighbors, remains a question the current scientific evidence is not yet equipped to answer with the confidence some popular and political accounts imply. There is a broader lesson embedded in the Illyrian case that connects it to nearly every other ancient population this kind of investigation touches. The desire for a clean, confirmed, singular ancestral story. A specific ancient people mapping directly onto a specific modern nation, with genetics providing the final, definitive proof. Runs into the same problem again and again across the ancient world. Populations mixed. Languages spread independently of bloodlines. Political boundaries drawn in the modern era rarely correspond cleanly to the genetic and linguistic boundaries of 2,000 years earlier. The Illyrians present this challenge in an unusually stark form, precisely because so much modern political weight has been placed on an ancestral claim that the underlying archaeological, linguistic, and genetic evidence can only partially support. This does not mean Albanian, Croatian, Bosnian, Montenegrin, or Serbian identity is somehow less legitimate or less rooted in real history. It means the specific mechanism of that rootedness, direct, provable, exclusive descent from a particular ancient tribal confederation 2,000 years in the past, is a more fragile foundation than either the enthusiastic tourist plaque or the nationalist textbook chapter tends to suggest. The Hilferts are still standing across the Dinaric Alps. The bronze helmets are still in museum cases in Tirana and Zagreb. Queen Tuta's brief, defiant war against Rome is still recorded, however incompletely, in Roman sources that had every reason to portray her as a villain. What remains genuinely unresolved, and what future ancient DNA research in the region may eventually clarify with the same precision it has already brought to the Thracians, the Etruscans, and the Iron Age Gauls, is the specific genetic thread connecting the people who built those Hilferts to the nations who claim them today. Until that research exists at the necessary scale, the most honest thing anyone can say about the Illyrian mystery is that it remains genuinely unsolved. Not because no one has looked, but because the ground has not yet given up enough of its evidence to settle a question this old and this contested, once and for all. Future excavations across Albania, Montenegro, and the wider Dinaric region, conducted with the same systematic ancient DNA sampling that has already transformed our understanding of Iron Age populations elsewhere in Europe, may eventually provide the resolution that political rhetoric on all sides currently claims to already possess. Science, in this particular case, is still catching up to the confidence of the argument being built on top of it. A reminder that the absence of an answer is itself a finding worth reporting honestly, rather than filling the gap with whichever version of the story happens to be more convenient.